Hello. Let me see here. This is the first time I've done one of these like this. Oops. Share sound. Good. There we go. Uh-oh. The Mac is asking for permission. There we go. Can you see it? Excellent. Very good. Hello. Thanks, Boris and Fission for hosting this. This feels really awesome. It's the first time I've spoken to more than 5 people at once in like 18 months. So that's exciting. But also we were talking, just the various panelists were introducing themselves, and it feels like kind of a food camp or a bar camp or something. It's been a long time since I think I've been in a group of really interesting people talking about the same thing. So that's fun. Anyhow, I'm Blaine. I do stuff on the internet. Currently I work at Condé Nast, which is a big publisher. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but this talk is about a thing that we've been working on kind of on and off. I think I've been working on it in some sense for about 8 years, called atJSON. It's kind of a weird name, but let's get into it. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the motivations for atJSON, like what were the problems that we were trying to address. So let's talk about Markdown. Markdown is pretty ubiquitous in our world, and sort of most relevantly, so I said I work at Condé Nast. So these are some of our brands, and we publish all of this content online. And as part of a recent round of digital transformation, the developers made a reasonable decision to just use Markdown for all of the brands. So thankfully, the New Yorker employees didn't actually have to type Markdown into the website, but everyone else did. And it makes sense as like a agile rapid development kind of thing. But one of the problems with Markdown is that there's not like this idea that all this common mark content is common. It's a lie. Because actually there were a bunch of different variants of the common mark that they had across the different brands. So each of these brands used, slightly different variants. So for example, my favorite example is like GQ used block quotes to represent like, an inline quote, and a pull quote to represent a thing that would sit outside the text and was kind of like a feature quote. Wired did the opposite. And so at some point we were like unifying all of the front end CMSs because each of these were separate applications. And when we did that, we had to normalize all of this content. And it was a real pain in the butt because it's really complicated. And this is like horror land, but like every Unicode string is a valid Markdown document, which is just terrible because parsing is actually pretty easy, and Markdown parsers are terrible, let me tell you. But inferring meaning is really hard. So if you think that parsing Markdown is hard, inferring meaning is basically impossible.
But Blaine, just one note, you've got a gray square in the top left that you may have a window over top of something.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, thank you.
Thanks
for letting me know. So this is a real problem. This problem is not unique to Condé Nast. For each of these different variants of Markdown, I guarantee you that there are uncountable different ways that the actual data is used, that the semantics are mangled. But I think Werner Herzog said it best.
Taking a close look at what's around us, there is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder. When I say this all full of admiration for the jungle. It is not that I hate it, I love it. I love it very much. but I love it against my better judgment.
So I feel very similar to Werner. Like, it's amazing that we have so much diversity. It's also horrible, collective murder. So people have been trying to solve this problem, and I think a lot of people probably in the audience are among the people building these tools. So this idea of blocks is something that's really gained prominence recently. So let's see here, is that playing? There we go. So WordPress has the new Gutenberg editor, which is a block-based editor. Notion has their blocks. There's a really good blog post about that recently. And there's literally 1,000 different editors that take this approach. But I want to take a step back and talk about one of the other motivations for atJSON and where we're coming from before going further into the block stuff. Excuse me. So I had a startup 8 years ago now. How does time go so quickly? Called Poetica. And really atJSON is an extraction from Poetica, but what we were trying to do was this, right? This is what editors do. And the editorial process isn't something that fits neatly into some, into these blocks. It's messy, it's complicated, it's extremely expressive. So this is what Poetica looked like. It wasn't quite so messy. We wanted it to be messier. But one of the hard requirements that we had for Poetica was that the ability for paragraphs and annotations, comments, and formatting to all overlap. So we didn't want to be constrained by this idea that you have this strict hierarchy of content. We wanted you to be able to just say what you meant and communicate directly, human to human, not mediated by some data structure, basically. Because really, when we talk about hierarchies are really useful. And like, I think Engelbert wrote about this and talked about hierarchies extensively, but the reality is there's more than one hierarchy on a piece of content. And these hierarchies are complicated, and they're interrelated, and they're just messy. They don't fit into these strict sort of linear hierarchical forms. So that's kind of where we're starting from. So we've got this trying to wrangle Markdown and trying to really think about how ideas really work and how humans communicate about ideas. So that's sort of where we get into atJSON. And really it's simple. So it's a format. It's not a standard because I've gone down those mines and I can't even. But basically it breaks down into two parts. We've got content, which is just, we can debate the specific semantics, but a JavaScript string for lack of a better definition, a Unicode string. And then annotations on that string. And that's just an array, just really, really simple. Each annotation has a type with a namespace, a start and an end offset that indexes into the string, and some arbitrary attributes. And that's really it. Like, that's the whole thing in terms of the format. And what we found is that this is incredibly useful. So it's an approach to separating the semantics from the content. And so we all understand how CSS separates style from form with HTML. And so we can extract the visual style so we don't have to encode it in the HTML document. So hopefully our HTML semantics can be richer and more explicit and everything. Frankly, I don't think that works, but atJSON is an approach of separating the semantics from the content. So we just decouple those things. And now we can have different layers of semantics Just like we can have different visual styles that kind of overlay, we can have all of these different semantics that refer to the text but aren't like interleaved and intertwined with the text. atJSON is also a set of tools, so it's a mostly TypeScript library to work with these annotated documents, because once you separate the content and the semantics, those offsets, you need to be able to adjust them when you change the text. So there's just a few little library functions that do that. So we can insert text, we can remove text, add annotations, remove annotations. And in terms of like actually manipulating documents, this is really the whole API. I went looking to see if there were other things, and this is it. So we do need this to be able to manipulate these documents. It's also, we've got a few sort of utility tools on top of that. So we have this tool set called the hierarchical intermediate representation, which is just a way of translating these annotations into hierarchical formats. We have a lot of hierarchical formats. If you want to render HTML or React or Markdown or anything like that, you have to have a tree that you can render from. So we found that useful enough that we've sort of built this general purpose thing to do this transformation. And I just want to, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but down the HELLOWORLD string down there, I think really illustrates how far we are from the content when we're dealing with hierarchical formats. So if you look at the content attribute over in the atJSON format, it says hello world, and you can see what it is, and you can see what that content is. In the hierarchical form, it's spread across all of these different parts of the tree. And so I think that's a nice illustration that I wanted to point out. But let's see here. atJSON also has this relational algebra. So I kind of describe this as like if SQL met XSLT, but with what I think is a reasonable syntax. But this is for defining converters or like manipulating documents. So once you have all of these semantics, how do you reason about them? How do you work with them? How do you manipulate them? So I'll just really briefly talk through. So if you wanted to convert a Google Docs format to, we have like this Rosetta format. This is just how you convert links. Or part of how you convert links. So we first find all of the underlined, like the underline annotations. So in Google Docs, it's this TS_un thing that they call it. We call those underlines. We do the same thing for links. And then we join them together by finding all of the annotations that are sort of aligned. So with concordant start and end positions. And then we just remove that underline because Google Docs basically has both the formatting of the underline and the link separately. And so we want to just say, no, these are just links. The formatting doesn't matter to us. So we do this kind of thing a lot. And it turns out it's a really useful, rich way to reason about content and whatnot. And then we have some other utility tools to help with modeling. So we have this concept of a source. So this is like a format. So we can basically map we haven't found something that we haven't been able to map, but like a content format to like a set of annotations. So like we have an HTML source that's defined from the HTML spec. It auto-generates and creates annotations for all different HTML types, element types and attributes and everything. And then we can take any parsed HTML document and convert it into the annotated form. A renderer, which is usually using that hierarchical stuff that I was talking about. And these are just utility classes to like help output content into like usually a string or something. So HTML, React, Markdown, that sort of thing. Converters, which we saw on the last slide, sort of how you map one schema to another. So if you wanted to transform HTML to Markdown, like what are the set of functions that you would need to apply to HTML to get it to be Markdown, basically. And then we have a bunch of predefined sources. So we've got one for CommonMark, Google Docs. Google Docs has a weird internal format that if you copy, it's in the paste buffer. CK editor, which is what we use as the rich text editor internally in Condé, and we do a bunch of stuff with that JSON in there. Mobile Doc, Prism, which is a XML format for publishing content like magazine layout stuff, WordPress, shortcodes, and so on. And then we have these Rosetta annotations that I mentioned. We call it offset. So it's basically just a set of like common sort of abstract annotations. So things like bold or italic or paragraph, or, you know, like these sort of like these core concepts that are kind of invariant across different formats. So we have a bunch of annotations there. And really what we use that for is when we define converters from, say, HTML to Markdown, what we do is, excuse me, instead of defining a converter from HTML to Markdown, we have a converter from HTML to offset, and then we have a way to render offset into Markdown so that we don't have to do an end-to-end number of converters. We can just do formats to offset and vice versa. And it reduces the number that we have to do there. So this is what converting a document looks like using atJSON. So this is actually like slightly cleaned up, but actually only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. We do this for all of the content that we have at Condé Nast. We convert from, should actually back up a little bit, and I have a little bit of time. It's a lot of content to go through in 20 minutes. So, so we have all of these different formats, the ones that I mentioned earlier, the like GQ specific common mark and the Vogue specific mark, common mark, and then Wired specific mark, common mark. So we have parsers and converters for each of those. And all of our content, because we didn't want to do like a stop the world bulk migrate everything, we just tagged all of the content as what type of content it was. And then when we render stuff to the CMS, like to the front end, we just do an on the fly translation of that to our common Markdown format, so that we don't need to do a gigantic conversion. It also lets us do incremental conversions, so we can improve our understanding over time. So we can support some things, but not everything. So I'll talk through this a little bit. So we start with our original document. So we take the raw Markdown content, and we end up with this original atJSON document that's the annotation version of the Markdown document. And then we convert that to our CMS, like our common shared understanding document, and we get this atJSON document that's like all of the common annotations. And then, sorry, I'm massively dehydrated. Excuse me. So then we render that to our specific Condé Markdown. And we get this generated Markdown. Excuse me. So we get this generated Markdown. And then we reparse that Markdown into an atJSON document. So we have this original document that's the atJSON annotations for the original Markdown. We've gone sort of this round trip to this shared version. And then we've got all of these annotations of the shared version. And if the original one equals the generated one, then we know that we understand everything about that document, because we can convert everything with full fidelity into like from A to B, which turns out is really, really useful. And it's maybe useful to point out here that for a given text, we can create a canonical set of annotations, but there are a bunch of different like valid but equal but unequal markdown or HTML representations of the same text. So you can, like, if you imagine in Markdown, the trivial example is like put in a few extra spaces and it's the same document, but they're different. And so by converting them to annotations, we can actually tell if the documents are the same, because there's this sort of canonicalization process that we can do much, much more easily than trying to parse and then canonicalize Markdown. So with the semantic diff, what we then have is we can diff the annotations, and we can know exactly which features from the original content we didn't support because they got dropped along the way. And so that allows us to do this sort of incremental migration where, you know, if we didn't parse some attribute on like a video, like a caption for a video, that would get dropped and we would be able to sort of detect that. So anyways, that was probably really confusing, but hopefully that made sense to some folks. So I want to go back to these motivations and just take a step back and talk a little bit about why I think atJSON is interesting, and this sort of annotation approach. So in the 1970s, in the late 60s, Charles Goldfarb and et al. Came up with this GML, which is Goldfarb, Mosher, Laurie, but a generalized markup language. And it was the first semantic markup language. And it was invented in a time when hard drives were, you know, the size of small cars, and slow and linear. And, you know, there were a bunch of reasons that interspersing these they were macros originally to expand into like instructions for a printer to lay out this stuff. Given the set of tools, this made a lot of sense. But then that became SGML and HTML and XML. And then someone had the bright idea that we should make HTML simpler, called it Markdown. And it turns out that they reinvented something from the 1960s, almost verbatim, except with less semantics. And I really worry that we're kind of stuck in a rut at this point. We don't, you know, we kind of went down this conceptual path, and there's a whole bunch that's really hard to do, that's really hard to express, and I feel, and having played with atJSON in practice for a while, I think there's actually a lot that we can unlock by shifting things up. I also want to go back to that blocks example. So this is blocks implemented in atJSON with you know, Notion, Rome, and TiddlyWiki content all intermixed. So, you know, I think this hopefully illustrates a little bit, like, you know, sometimes data models really do matter, and the way that we think about our content and our data really does change how we approach problems. And, you know, the Notion thing here, the content there, we can have sub documents. So the content inside there could be an atJSON document itself. So you get all of the nice sort of graph properties of a lot of the stuff that people are doing with blocks. But in this super flexible way that can be interspersed with text, can be interspersed with different things, like different formats and whatnot. And you get, like, you know, the relational algebra that I was talking about, and just, I don't know, there's a lot to explore there. So just wanted to sort of throw that out there. And I'll point out, just for point of interest, because the people watching this are probably nerds. Until a few years ago, I didn't know that Unicode had this character, but it's an object replacement character. It's right there. It's sitting there for us. It was right there. So I would be remiss not to talk a little bit about the downsides of atJSON. So the first is that you need a rich text editor. You're not going to be editing this by hand. I mean, you could, but that would be painful. This is really something that we need a tool to help us edit. Having worked with editors and writers for a long time, that's not actually a downside. I think programmers, we like Markdown, it's great, it's easy to type. Everyone else hates it, like just with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. They find it really confusing. You basically have to understand HTML to use Markdown. And I think, using star as a shorthand makes a lot of sense, but people want tools that support their thought, and those are rich text editors. And with a rich text editor, we can do all of this annotation stuff. The other downside is that the tooling is really, really early. There have been a handful of people who've worked on the atJSON tools. We've built them for really specific use cases. It's kind of a side project within Condé. So there's a lot, it's like ROF, pre-trof, and GROF, and ROF, and all of those tools. We're not even at the sort of HTML level, even HTML1 level of tooling here. So I just wanted to be upfront about that. But I think being able to have different views on data is super, super powerful. And there are a lot of people working on this stuff. There's been definitely an uptick, like Ian at Codex with he calls annotation standoff. And there's a lot out there that I definitely did not have time to put in this talk. But I think it's an interesting space to watch anyways. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I hope that all made sense. Cheers.
Amazing. So panelists, this is jazz hands instead of applause. Thank you so much, Blaine. That was fantastic. We have a ton of questions, so I'll just go through them one at a time from top to bottom. Bill Seitz asked, aren't there effectively potentially overlapping annotations? Doesn't that break hierarchy?
So we use a yes, but no. So we use a rank, like there's a sort. So like paragraphs always go before bold, for example, and that's just defined in the semantics of your format. So when we create the hierarchy, yeah, paragraphs would always contain bolds, but if there's a bold that crosses two paragraphs, we would just insert the bold into both of those paragraphs. We've had some pretty complicated situations, and it actually works really well for what it's worth. Yeah, can definitely discuss that more, of course, but.
How does Brian James Rubinton from Canopy asked, how does atJSON differ from other structured text editor toolkits such as Prose Mirror?
So it's really it's this annotation centric approach. So Notion, Prose Mirror, all of them have this. They ultimately you kind of have to have this concept of marks, which are the bold kind of setup. Which covers part of text. And we just went full bore with it. So we said, look, we don't need blocks. We don't need, these different chunks of content. We can represent all of that just with the annotations. So I think that's the main difference. It's a little bit abstract, but there's a lot of subtleties here. So I don't know how much detail I can get into.
Marc-Antoine Parent asks, what happens when you insert at an intersection boundary? So slightly similar to what was asked before, but I think more nuanced.
Yeah. One of the things that we have is this concept of what is it? What is it even called? Boundary behaviors. So this is one of my favorite things about, like, I've kind of built too many text editors using HTML at this point. And one of the expectations that, like, the user expectations are really interesting. So if you insert text at the end of a hyperlink, the expectation is that the text that you insert will not extend the hyperlink, like it'll not be contained within the hyperlink. If you insert text at the end of a bold, the expectation is that the bold will extend. And so the behavior of like how you modify the annotations is actually dependent on the annotation. And so we have some tooling to handle that, that sort of case. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Does the Ethan Plant ask, does the decoupling of semantics and content work in Markdown and block structures? Could it just be layered on top?
Yes, yeah. So I think we need to, I do think that you need to separate, like you actually need a physical separation of the semantics to get these properties. I don't think that there's a way to do this inline in the text, because then you end up with these sort of overlapping structures that become virtually impossible to parse. And there's a few, like, just the way that we conceptualize about things. You know, you could model everything as self-closing spans with IDs. So you have like a start span and you have an end span. But then those two spans are related. And then you have to reason about how they're related. And so I think this approach of like just moving everything out, saying, here's an annotation, it's got some semantic properties, and it applies to this text, actually just makes it easier to think about a lot of these problems than trying to model it in Markdown or in a block or anything like that.
I think probably the mental model that a lot of people have is, I have my favorite text editor and I'm doing this, but this is where the rich text or using an app comes in. Mm-hmm. You know, you could store Markdown. And I think that's some of our topics around interchange, right? We wanted to start with atJSON to go like, look, here's a candidate that could mix and match between these things. It's not really important in export, but it can be. Mm-hmm. And so how do we interchange things without losing semantic detail? Between tools of different fidelity.
And indeed, the way that we model the like text editors, so we have a CK editor implementation where basically we've modified CK editor, so its internal data model is atJSON, and then that gets converted into the rendering pipeline that CK editor uses to update its sort of DOM. And then all of the events that CK editor fires get converted back into atJSON, and then back into the DOM model. It turns out it's ridiculously fast to do this, so it's not a performance problem, but it gives us a bunch of ways to reason about what's happening with the text editor that we wouldn't have traditionally had. So I think I mentioned in passing, like videos with captions. Modeling that in an editor is really complicated, actually. It's a really complicated thing because in the HTML version, you have sort of like a div and then a video inside and then a caption tag, or there's a bunch of different ways that you can model that. When we reason about it in our rich text editor, that is sadly not open source, I'm working on it. We just have a video that has a caption property, and then how that gets rendered is kind of besides the point, to be honest. So that makes this stuff a lot easier. So.
Flancian asked, how does atJSON relate to the web annotation standard and model? It seems to have at least some overlap, like the text position selector.
Mm-hmm. So you can definitely do this with the W3C stuff. I have thoughts. It's good. It's just kind of complicated, to be honest. I think it's a bit overwrought, and this is just an easier way. I find it easier to think about it in this way. It's sort of like, you know, you can render, you can model everything in JSON using XML, and the reality is we don't. So.
I think there's a good point here to be made. Again, you know, I really wanted Blaine to present. The work has been going on in solving real problems at Condé Nast, and even some phrases on the README around 100-year document format is something I think which resonates with tools for thought. And this is coming from the like, no, we're trying to do this. We're not trying to be a large consortium of entities creating a standard. And there's tension between that, especially with how quickly the tools for thought movement is happening right now. So let's work on running code.
Yeah.
And we'll work on rough consensus as working open source software. I'm doing call outs to a bunch of other things like standards processes there, which we can dig into. Ethan asks, how's the performance? I think like, can this use real time? I think Blaine already answered that. Basically, the answer is yes. CK Editor can be used real time in a browser. So you could certainly do it in a native app of various kinds. Gordon, I expect a Swift implementation on my desk by Monday. Thank you very much. Peter Wasilko asks, have you taken a look at functional optics libraries like partial lenses?
Is this like the Cambria stuff? No, different? I'm not sure then. No, that's interesting.
I think he dropped a link, so we'll
okay, cool.
We'll make sure that gets looked at. And this is the exact kind of thing where at the end of this, everyone that you see here who's interested will get into some sort of forum, GitHub discussion format where we can talk more about this. Mark Antoine, does the toolkit include an HTML editor widget other than CK Editor for native atJSON documents?
There have been experiments, not currently. Yeah, we built a web component editor. Its build is currently very broken. And last week, some unrelated stuff, I adapted Slate JS to use atJSON as its sort of interchange format. So it's definitely possible. But yeah, this is one of the tools are early. So.
Ethan, and I'm going to use he's got two questions, so I'll kind of ask them both again. Could the decoupling of semantics and content work in apps that use a block structure? Could it just be layered on top? And then how difficult would be allow for image, audio, and video annotation? So
one of the reasons that it's that the attribute that contains the text is called content is because we've thought about, that content could be a URL to a video. And I kind of glossed over, there's also like a content type attribute. And so this offset, like the start end position model works natively with video because you have start and end positions and audio. For images, you can have X and Y. For 3D objects, you can have X, Y, and Z. Like this, I think this model scales to lots of different content types. We haven't built any of that. It's just sort of like, in theory, you could do this, and that would be cool, is about as far as we've gotten. But it's definitely one of the motivating factors for approaching it this way was like, there was that really nice conceptual mapping. I've also thought a little bit about actually modeling PDF using this stuff. So you would have it's basically PDF inverted. So you have the text and then you annotate it with the positions of the characters and the layout. And rather than the way the PDF does it, which is like the positions and then the text. So you could have, an annotation document, visual document format of some sort. So,
yep. One more question, and then we'll move on to Jeremy. How is this similar and different from Codex's standoff annotation?
Ian and I had a chat actually with Boris about a month and a half ago, and we were like, oh, we built the same thing. It is exactly the same, almost to the dot. So we call it different things, but it's, it's extremely similar.
So I think that's really one of the questions of bringing this together and the motivation. And Ian, he's in Australia, so this time zone doesn't work for both Europe and Australia. So we'll have him next week. And ideally, Sam Klein says essential convergence. So ideally what we will do is have multiple people who are interested in working on this. So the tools are early, will also get solved by the fact that many people want the same thing, and it makes sense for us to work on this stuff together. Public and common goods, which is a topic I talk about. Hey, once again, a round of applause and chat smileys for Blaine. Thank you so much. That was super fantastic. And yes,